All right, we are back for Tankie group therapy session. It's day 170 of the war on Gaza, and we've got our full complement. We've got Matteo, Mikey, Sina, Nora, Alex. So let's go. I guess I'll start. I wanted to a couple of things that have been. I mean, just the Shifa thing. I'm sure you guys are going to talk about. I cannot believe that we can go lower. Like we can just there's however low you think Israel can go, and then each time they do something even lower. I said on my sit rep that it is amazing to see that the resistance is actually fighting them there, and that's gonna. I think that battle is just gonna expand. Um, I think it's just gonna keep going because wherever this is the fundamental military dynamic of this war is if the Israelis show up and stay anywhere for any length of time, then they come under attack. So if they insist on committing atrocities at al-Shifa, as they seem to do, they're going to be doing it while getting blown up and attacked, and not a leisurely stroll through war criminal lane as they did the first time around. So I mean, it's horrifying. Um, there's like there's a thing I've been avoiding. You know, at first when I was trying to figure out what they were doing with this U.S. peer, I was trying to figure out why they would do it, and so I did a lot of sit reps where I was speculating about what it could be about, and then I kind of came to the conclusion that talking too much about what they're planning to do after they win the war is itself playing into their hands a little bit. That's what they want us all thinking about. Oh, we're going to occupy it. We're going to settle it. We're going to cleanse the inhabitants. We're going to murder everybody. We're going to move them by sea. We're going to move them into Rafah. We're going to build townhouses. We're going to cut the area off. We're going to get the gas. But my refrain is they have to win the war first, and they're not going to win the war. So that's, all of these horrors that we're seeing are ultimately not even going to win them the war. So it's just so impossible. There was also a moment last week where I was talking to a friend who had that. I'm sure we've all been through that, and I'm not going to say who it was. Some of you probably know. If you know, you know. But they were just like, why can't they just launch their missiles already? Why can't Iran just do it already? Why isn't Tel Aviv like being lit up already, right? And it's like the patience, the strategy that's based on patience in the face of atrocities doesn't change because the atrocities get dialed up. The strategy has to remain the same. The only way this can be won is with unbelievable patience. And so it's just like that can be a painful thing. Like it is a painful thing in the face of everything that we're seeing. But that's the message that I kind of take. The last thing, I talked to Amaresh Mishra. I told you guys on the group chat. He's this Indian, and for me, it's like a cultural thing. I don't know if you guys find this, but like when I started to get into political work, I guess in my late teens and early 20s, I always looked for that. The first thing I looked for was like my own culture. So the Indian independence struggle, which was like Gandhi and Nehru and nonviolence. And honestly, that was like that really held back my politics for a long time. And I'm only kind of coming out of it now, and understanding how that whole politics is itself a setup, a kind of a way of channeling politics into a harmless dead end. And so Amaresh Mishra, he wrote the book on the 1857 war that it's referred to by the British as a mutiny, but in fact it was like a gigantic war across India to try to overthrow the British. And the British committed an immense Holocaust in India afterwards as a reprisal. Like they killed millions and millions of people, maybe 1 in 8. Nobody knows, but like, it was this massive uprising and a massive battle and it was an armed struggle. And so Amaresh Mishra kind of connected that, and he was saying like, this is what reminds me of what he was seeing in Palestine, reminds him of what he understands like 1857 was about. And the way that in 1857 the revolutionaries had this idea of faith, like, and he tries to, and it wasn't like Hindu faith or Muslim faith, that was like, this is our land and it's our struggle, and it is kind of faith-based, but it's not sectarian. And that's how he sees Hamas now. That's how he sees the Palestinian resistance. And it was just very, and people were very appreciative of it. People were like, wow, like this guy's in India, like I'm in India, I didn't know this was a thing, you know. And he says that he's getting incredible responses to his Hindi language sit reps. So for me, like, these are the things that I was watching this week, and just trying to draw some way of organizing my thoughts and organizing my thinking for trying to withstand the Shifa and the starvation that we're seeing. I mean, the last thing I guess is Pape on the EI, the Electronic Intifada live stream on Wednesday, where he was he, you know, though I always watch Pape because he's always talking about how this is the beginning of the end, and I'm like, when's it gonna end though? When's it gonna end? So he said like 15 months, so I've been like marking the calendar, but then he made it a little bit more vague in the EI live stream. He said, you know, the next 1 or 2 or 3 years is going to be really, really bad, and he, you know, we have to, the thing he said was like, the more relentless the pressure on all areas that we can do, the shorter this could be. So I'll stop there. Who wants to go next? Nora, your mic is off, so maybe you want to go next.
Oh, yeah, it was I was always, as always, I was very moved by Ilan Pape's kind of prophecy of doom. But yeah, I think what was really interesting, I mean, there's so many interesting and prescient things that he was saying in that interview that we did. And one of them was like, you know, talking about how this is the end of the Zionist project, how this is the you know, kind of the last stage of this like horrific settler colonial ideology, and how the generations now of educational indoctrination and cultural like militaristic violent society that Israel has created for itself. I mean, this is the end result of this, where, you know, you have these Israeli soldiers like committing these unspeakable crimes around al-Shifa, where you have them, you know, torturing children and filming it for their audience back home. And there's something, you know, I don't know if comforting is the right word. But that's kind of the feeling that I had when we were talking to him, and he was like, yeah, this is the end. Like, this is the end of this stage of this project. And like, Israel can't hold on to the image that it has created for itself anymore. And you know, Israel as a society is internally rotten. And you know, and then I think of Fanon, you know, talking about how the act of colonization is, you know, is also dangerous for the colonizers, for the ones doing it, and how it just kind of exacerbates their own moral rot. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, I mean, the end of Israel can't come soon enough. The end of the Zionist project can't come soon enough. And I'm also struggling with patience. I'm struggling with that patience that you're talking about, Justin. I've been glued for the last week to everything that's been happening at Shifa. I've written a couple of posts on what's been happening there. I'll probably have to write an update to my update tomorrow. And it just gets worse. I mean, now, over the weekend, there's been documented testimony, not fake testimony like the Israelis do, but documented testimony of systematic rape being used by Israeli soldiers on women in and around Shifa, including an incident of a pregnant woman who was raped by an Israeli soldier. And just I don't know, it's incomprehensible, the amount of horrors. And this is just me in my one little tiny corner of the internet, in my very well curated Twitter feed, 90% of which is in English. And so I'm not even, nobody is seeing a fraction of what's actually happening on the ground. And we hear about this more and more where, people who have family in Gaza and they're able to speak with them on the phone, the amount of just incomprehensible horrors that people are witnessing, and they're not being documented, they're not being broadcast, they're not being written about. It's yeah, it just makes me sick. I think it makes us all sick. Yeah, I don't know. It's just been just really difficult to wrap my little head around the depravity of Israel. And yeah, I mean, all of these horror stories, like they just kind of swirl around, and I have a hard time sleeping, and blah blah blah, all the stuff. But like, I think for the rest of our lives, we'll be uncovering stories about what happened, and we'll learn more, and we won't be able to unsee or unhear what we hear. And so I don't know how we prepare for that. But I can take some comfort, I guess, in knowing that this is the beginning of the end of Israel, and that helps me gather a little bit more patience, I guess. I don't know. But again, it's really hard to be patient. But that's the task of revolutionaries, right? Like, we have to be patient. We have to trust the process, as they say. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
I mean, Pape's a historian, right? And this is why therapy, the way we do it for a situation like the one we're facing, makes more sense. Like, if you were just a therapist that didn't understand history or politics, it would be really hard to help people. But like, to be able to say there's all these precedents, there's all these signposts that this project is on the verge of collapse, that's actually what we need to know, more than that something that it has something to do with like our parents and our childhoods or whatever, right? That's
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mishra, the other thing I wanted to say, just like Mishra, at the end of the interview, I asked Mishra like what he thinks of why there's so little opposition inside Israel, and he was so dismissive that was also like, it gave me it was, he just was like, well, it's not a real country, right? So it doesn't really matter what public opinion in that. And he was like, because he's following like all the resistance thinkers too, and he's like, well, I mean, they call it an entity, it's not a real nation, it's not a real country. So I thought that was like, just to kind of follow it from October 7th and come to the conclusion that this is not a real country anyway. It's like you see what someone with a historical view can see clearly. Who wants to go next? Alex. Alex?
Yeah, I'll go. So as a historian, I think what you guys have said makes a lot of sense, right? Justin, when you mentioned the task of how to organize uh, the things that are actually happening, and how we try to conceptualize it, how do we try to understand it, and I find myself constantly just grasping at like historical events, right? So you did your recent civilization episode on the Easter Rising in Ireland, right? Like there's so many parallels though that we could talk about on a different time. But today is the anniversary of, in Argentina today, they're celebrating March 24th. They're commemorating what happened in March 24th, 1976, which was the most Nazi military dictatorship to take power in Latin America. Like they were outright fascist Nazis who ruled Argentina from 76 to 83. They used to torture Argentine Jewish prisoners, under the portraits of Hitler. They disappeared 30,000 people. So every March 24th, Argentine civil society comes out and says, never again, nunca más. But this year has like a different punch, I think, because we always say never again, and yet again it's happening. One of the things that's interesting about Argentina is that they've actually managed to culturally, socially, and politically imbue this idea of never again in a really powerful way than most other Latin American countries that suffered something similar haven't been able to do. And this is one of the problems that their current madman president is facing, and his vice president, who still talks to one of these murderers who's in jail, and she talks to him because that's her mentor, right? So just another example of how not even the dead are safe from the enemy, as Benjamin wrote. So I'm thinking about what happened in al-Shifa, or is happening at al-Shifa in that context. A photograph that I didn't want to see, and I saw of a Palestinian victim run over by a tank, and the only thing left are this person's legs, and one of the legs was in a cast. So that picture shows obviously the genocidal depravity of this army and this settler colonial project, but then it also shows that a hero health worker had managed to help this person for a little bit, right, with the cast on the leg. It's just a brutal, we've all seen this stuff that's changed us forever and we're never going to forget. But seeing that picture and reading all these testimonies that are coming out, like I was, probably ruining our group chat with like questions about like what is this, right? But I just keep coming to a point that I made last week, like when it was just Matteo, Justin, and me, right? Like the after is just, there is no after. There cannot be an after with this type of genocidal violence that's been that's been exercised in 5+ months. And so I just trying to follow that, trying to think about the joke of international law. And then if we try to, as a historian, if we try to go to the very root of international law and how it gets created, international law has always been about protecting particular forms of colonial configurations, from the people who designed it to the way it's applied and not applied. But one way I think about what's going on is that this I think marks finally an end to like this post 9/11 war on terror era, perhaps. And perhaps this is the way that it's supposed to end. Because if there was any sort of, obviously international law is bullshit and hypocritical and all that. But like if there was an era that witnessed what bullshit it was after 9/11 on a global scale in a variety of different ways, and considering the role of the US in facilitating, arming, and financing this genocide. Like this is the end. I think we're fine. Like there's people have called like different ends to this era, but I think we're seeing the beginning of the end. And obviously historians will tell you periodization is bullshit and it's, whatever. But I think we're seeing something momentous and horrific at the same time. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is I finally watched the October 7th documentary that Al Jazeera did, and a couple of things stood out. Maybe if you guys are interested, we could chat. But the scale of the military defeat is pretty like it was a huge military defeat on the part of Israel, to the point that like the Hamas guerrillas were surprised at the scale of their ability to do what they did. Um, so in a way, maybe that's one way to think about the type of horrific violence that we've witnessed since then. Um, it's in relation to the scale of military defeat, and this is something like that John Elmer always talks about too, right? In all the things that he's posted and talked about in different formats. That high tech versus low tech. That's the way that some of the talking heads frame that conflict. And how, I mean, in the history of insurgencies and guerrilla warfare, low tech, it's always low tech on the guerrilla side, and yet they managed to do some pretty incredible things. But as you guys said, it takes patience, it takes a lot of violence, and it takes a lot of suffering on the side that's trying to fight for freedom, for independence, for liberation. And then the other thing from that documentary that really stands out is just how quickly these narratives were repurposed by the Israelis to justify and to provide a purpose for the type of horrific violence that we're witnessing today. I mean, right away. But without, obviously there's no evidence for it. But we are seeing type of evidence for that type of violence that they described happening in al-Shifa for more than a week now. And that's really striking to me. And yet I haven't seen any U.S. mainstream media, I mean, I might be mistaken, cover what's happening in al-Shifa. They didn't even cover what the UN report on the systematic sexual violation and assaults of Palestinian women and children. They haven't covered that. So pretty much every day I'm trying not to have like a Joker moment. And that's particularly living in the United States and knowing that this is the way that the mainstream media and politicians, what they're telling us is bullshit. And it's so obviously bullshit. And yet they're still here telling us this. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Argentina is interesting too, because after October 7th, pro-Israel people had this refrain where they said it's the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And it's like, nope, that was Argentina, actually. That was Argentina Dirty War, done on behalf of capital and U.S. interests.
And someone was sending them weapons and high-tech missiles, and that was Israel.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. Yeah, so in every anyway, yeah, I don't have to repeat all of our refrains. Mikey, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the stuff that folks just kind of touched on speak to what I've been thinking a lot about, again, as a filmmaker, but also as an organizer who tries to view things in kind of the longue durée historical lens of revolution, right? And how it's possible and how it succeeds and where it fails and where it stumbles. And I think, yeah, the reason that historians like Ilan Pappé are seeing like the beginning of the end of Israel is because we're seeing all the markers of an empire or a colonial entity in straight up collapse, right? And the kind of revolutionary victories you see in historically successful revolutions, and looking at things through kind of the lens of filmmaking. I actually watched Battle of Algiers for the first time in a long time, and there are several great moments that I didn't really pick up on until this much later viewing. It's been like over 10 years since I've watched it. There's a character, Ali, who is kind of like sort of a stand-in for the audience, where there is unspeakable shit going down, being, atrocities being perpetrated by the French colonists. And he is always just like going to whoever will listen, the higher ups, being like, why are we not blowing shit up right now? Like, why are we not lighting the whole place on fire? And they're like, we get it, we get you, but trust us that we need to be thinking and working strategically. We need to be patient, because we can have this cathartic moment right now and lose, or we can do what needs to be done in a way that is in line with a long-term revolutionary strategy, and we can win. And then there's this great rooftop scene near the end where this revolutionary kind of like leader is talking to the same character, telling him that the hardest part is the day after we win, right? And so I think just it's a great reminder that like if we are to have a revolutionary politics, we have to be thinking years ahead and then working in the now to make that happen. And I think this is why we are seeing on both sides this huge shift in what each side views as the realm of the possible. I think October 6th in the mind of everyone in the colonial entity, it made them collectively fucking insane. Like it ruined their brains, right? Because kind of to pick up what Nora mentioned about Fanon again, like it not only humanizes the colonized, it humanizes the colonizer, right? In this kind of way where they have viewed themselves as invincible and kind of like Uber mentioned in the act of dehumanizing the oppressed. This was a historic rehumanizing event, right? Where they realized their mortality, their vulnerability, at the hands of the people that they were oppressing, and there are these striking images, right, of the invincible IOF soldiers being humiliated and pulled out of a burning tank, that giant barbed wire fence being torn down. And I think that ripped the kind of like collective colonial psyche apart. And they have never and will never recover from that. And I think we're seeing like these dramatic overcompensations throughout the past 5 months, just kind of most recently evidenced in like these absolutely wild, like, Purim, costumes and in the kind of war crimes that are being committed in the front, where they are doing everything they can to try to recapitulate all of their acts of dehumanization against the oppressed, that like they're trying to claw their way back into that sense of superiority that they lost on October 7th. And it's only further revealing to the world like who they always were to begin with, right? And I hope we get to talk about this more later, but I think one thing that was really, really striking about the pretense for this second raid on al-Shifa, right? We all knew that there would be some kind of bullshit excuse that they would do after the fact about some Hamas militants being holed up once again in al-Shifa. But what was pretty clear from the get was that the most likely reason behind this was nothing other than vengeance over once again being humiliated, right? By Al-Qassam releasing footage to Al Jazeera that basically showed step by step how they followed and tracked the officer leading the initial raid on al-Shifa and then sniping him and recording all of it, right? Just showing how much they are completely in control of the ground war and how the IOF has no intelligence in the field. And I think going back to what Justin said earlier too about this Netzarim corridor, I hope we can talk about that more, because it is when you do kind of like lay out the whole like kind of like long-term plan behind it, it's so clearly unexecutable with the new facts on the ground, right? So it's clearly just a narrative that Israel and the U.S. are trying to convey, that we are in control of the situation. We're going to bifurcate, the northern half of Gaza from the south, and it's just not going to happen for all of the reasons that are so clear to us now. Yeah, so I think those are some kind of silver linings, is that like even the worst things, the best laid plans that this genocidal entity has in store, it's kind of like last days of the Third Reich, you know, where it's like, you know, like there's a great scene in Downfall, one of many great scenes in Downfall, where Hitler's talking to Albert Speer, you know, in front of, you know, the the new Germany that they want to create, and he's like, you know, it's actually good that we're getting, you know, smacked by the USSR right now, because it'll just make it easier to build new Germany, right? And so I think that's kind of like where they're at right now, where they think like they're basically at a stage of grief where they're trying to bargain and rationalize like all of these catastrophic losses that they're taking, and yeah, it's mad copage and it's not working.
Yeah, trying to recover that sense of superiority. It's interesting because like we're doing these therapy sessions because of what we're dealing with mentally, and like that's what they're dealing with mentally, and it's so different that we also have such a hard time getting into that. Like we can't talk to each other because we don't understand that mentality, and it's like the alienation from our own societies. Because Canada also, I hardly reported on this. There was the US brought a draft ceasefire, supposed ceasefire surrender resolution. Canada debated a whole thing in their parliament. It was this big charade, and it was just like, in both cases, they had to destroy whatever they said they were trying to do. They said they were trying to create a ceasefire resolution, but in the end they had to slip in the superiority, the racial superiority that, you know, the horrific attacks of October 7th must never be allowed to repeat, and their perpetrators must be brought to justice. And it's like, as Alex said, all of these atrocities in al-Shifa, actual evidence for rapes and murders of children and beheading of children, and everything that they said the Palestinians did, they're doing now. And those things are just ignored. Like Canadians will just ignore, the Canadian politicians will just ignore it. Like you can just say it right to their face and it'll just go whoop. They cannot handle it because it doesn't fit their superiority, their idea of racial superiority, that this is something we do to you. It's not something and like we do it to you because you want to do it to us. They can't understand that a different mentality, like a mentality of like what I think we would all call like a normal human being, which is not somebody who wants to dominate and murder and get some kind of pleasure from these things, but like somebody who wants to be free and travel and raise their children and do all the things that Palestinians are doing, like have a healthcare system, you know, distribute food, all the incredible things that they do. As soon as Israeli pressure lets up even a little bit, they start building their society again, they start organizing their society again, and then it freaks them out. It freaks the Israelis out all over again. So thank you for that. The other thing I thought of when you were talking about the downfall scene was like, you think in films, right? Like we were talking about history and you're a filmmaker, and Sina thinks in memes, and Sina's always showing that meme of that little dog with the background on fire saying this is fine. And that's also like very emblematic of what Israel's doing right now, right? Just burning it all and going, this is fine. They're literally doing that. Right? There was like some fashion blogger who like showed a telescope view of destroyed Gaza, and she's like, this is the most beautiful view. This is the most beautiful view. Like the most beautiful view? Like that's a mentality that is different. That's not a normal mentality. That's not a normal human mentality to think of that as beautiful. Okay, Matteo, you're up.
Can you hear me, guys? Yes, sorry. Hi, Mikey. Sorry, I just said that. It's nice to see you. Never see you before. Well, yeah, I mean, the main, the main sensation, the main feeling that I've been having in the past, I mean, since last time we saw each other, and the past 2 weeks overall, is that war is coming. And by that, I mean, I wanna zoom out from Palestine for a second, because I just think that Palestine is an intensified version of what is happening. Ukraine. I have to talk about Ukraine, because what I'm seeing, and I mean, even when you look at what's happening in Russia, when you're seeing the casual manner people are talking about war, it's not normal. You know what I mean? Like when we say the casual way the Israelis are allowed to do what they're doing, this complete pretense of having a justification. I don't know how it looks like from the US, but in Europe, the way I'm seeing it is that there is a call for rearmament, that it's true. It's not just statements, it's happening. Like you feel around you the fear of talking openly about certain things, the pressure also that, you know, the mediatic pressure that it's around going for war. We are fighting for this. It's exactly the same thing. I mean, all that you guys have been talking about, I think it really applies also to what it's happening in Ukraine, this sense of total domination that the US-led empire with Europe has been having for years. And Russia has shattered that with that special military operation. It literally shattered this idea of total domination. And now there is this absolute incapacity of dealing logically and rationally with the fact that we can't just go for war, but every single, you know, politician belonging to the ruling elite is talking about war. It's scary. I can't say it's something that, you know, you can just let it go and okay, this is they're just saying it, you know, this is okay, you know, we let's not take it seriously. No, this is true. It's like the Israelis, what they do whatever they want at the end of the day. So what I'm just trying to say is that Ukraine is another fundamental battle, because it is really central also to the liberation of Palestine, because what NATO is doing there, it's absolutely insane. That country has lost its autonomy a long time ago. It's being used as a pawn, as many others it happened. And this renazification, and I'm using the language of Putin because I mean, it doesn't mean that he's not saying the right things at times, but this complete renazification of Europe, it's happening. And it's scary. So, I mean, this kind of, that's where I'm at right now. Now, this kind of feeling that I know this history is telling me that the world is changing, but at the same time, Europe is sick. You know, it's like it's in a comatose stage, and you never know how that cancer is going to spread. So, yeah, that's my existential moment, I guess.
Fear. Yeah, I mean that's a real feeling. I think, you know, with Gaza, watching Gaza, that's like the constant, like that's also the catharsis of like wanting what people lose their patience, right? It's like, well, then let's just get it over with then. If they're holding this sword over our heads all this time, and that's how it's felt with Gaza since 2005. Like Israel's been holding genocide over their heads, right? Like if you resist this much, this is the threshold for genocide, and then Israel just moves the threshold closer and closer until just existing is cause for genocide. And that's where they got to. And it's like trying to train everybody behaviorally through these electric shocks to do what, to completely surrender, at which point they're going to do what they were going to threaten anyway. So it is an impossible situation, and it is like a fear that they're trying to instill. I mean, the linkages, Matteo, between Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine, we've all resisted despite every one of us follow Russia, Ukraine so closely, and we just resist it because like trying to stay in our lanes. But the thing that happened in the terrorist attack, and the way they talked about it being ISIS, and it's like really? Like, what's ISIS though? Like, these were Tajiks supposedly. What are they like? I thought ISIS was in Iraq and Syria. Now you can just have a few bunch of people from Tajikistan show up and murder a bunch of people in a theater in Moscow and start heading for the Ukraine border. And that's ISIS now. If that's ISIS, then anything is ISIS. And then if that's ISIS, then probably the US is ISIS, right? I mean, so I don't know. You're right that like it all kind of, because we've talked about Russia being an ally of Syria and kind of preventing the fall of Syria to ISIS. And, I think that was how they tried to spin this attack. They said, it's kind of revenge for Russia fighting Islam in Syria or something. But it's all impossible to disentangle all of these threads. They're all it's all one big mess. And so, yeah, it unraveling that, figuring out even how that works is such a task. But we have to do it. We have to try. And now we give it to Sina. Sina, you're the last. You're the decider.
I'm the Hollywood Square.
You're the Hollywood Square.
Do people even get that joke who aren't like under 50? Like I never even watched Hollywood Squares.
I watched Hollywood Squares. I watched it a lot.
I don't even know how it works.
Like Thursday nights. It's a tic-tac-toe. It's tic-tac-toe.
But you ask questions to the person in the square?
You ask questions, the host asks questions to the person in the square, the person answers the question, and then the contestant, has to decide whether the person, the celebrity, answered the question correctly or incorrectly. So if you say if you say correctly and they were correct, then you get your X or your O is on that square. But if you're wrong,
wow, Justin, you're so smart. How did you know this?
Because I watched the show.
Oh, okay.
I watched all of these shows.
I just heard all these allusions to it.
Yeah.
And like Simpsons jokes around it, but I never actually watched the show. This has nothing.
That show was part of my Americanization.
Oh no!
Mine too.
Culture jihad on you through that show.
Yeah. My parents watched that show. Probably helped with their English or something.
I guess I have a kind of global. I'm lucky because I get to like sit and listen to you guys, and then I attempt to kind of like string some things together, but. I've had this thought in my head all week long, well, for a while now, and I probably said this on this show, but I know I have said it because like this is like a recurring thing for me in terms of the representation of reality and like how we have this immense ability and like this is so pedantic and I do this every time, but I'm going to do it anyways. But like essentially like we have this ability with like the tool of realism, like the aesthetic development of realism, like the technology of realism, that is to say, which is new technology, right? It's relatively new to our human history, like a few hundred years, a few centuries, relative to like our ability to represent the world and like the history of that discipline. Realism is this kind of relatively very recent development, and so one of its factors is this kind of elasticity of time, kind of accordion-like view of time. You can and this is like if you read any novel, this is how a novel works. Most novels, anyways. Fuck the modernists. Go to hell, modernists. You're a bunch of fascists, anyways. But the idea that you can expand time to make it necessary to draw this scene in this house where the lovers get together or they fight or something critical happens, and then you can like push the accordion back together and time speeds up again and it becomes shorter and you can like propel time like 5 years later. So like in these moments we want to have the fiction gives us a tool gives us the ability to read history. Like I stand by this, like one of the reasons why we need fictions is to help us process the world, right? Like it's both a kind of like working out for like everyone involved in the fiction making, like the writer, the whatever, the director, like it's a way that they express their views of reality and also make money, but also it's a way for us reading those texts, and reading includes viewing and listening and whatever, going in person, and this is all technology that has developed in us and we've developed along with it. And so like really this ability to witness the very intimacy of something very old, right, which is colonial genocide, right? Like it's a good old fashioned colonial genocide that we're watching, right? And I'm saying that with like obviously very deep ironic quotes, right? Like this is an older historical process that goes back a long time. Like human beings have done this to other human beings in many different contexts. Now, did we have the and I can't help think of like sometimes it just like weighs down on me just thinking about like the scale of all the murder, just the murder alone to like lay the groundwork figuratively and literally for like my existence here, for like every step I take on this land. Like there required all this bloodshed to like cleanse the land, and then the bloodshed that came with the workers who died building the land, like all these violent processes that overlap, and almost like as if God is like looming together this like, you know, textile of human pain. Like that's a brutal, like it's sometimes it feels like that. Like sometimes it feels like I have to go outside and be like, no, the world is many more things than just the violence that perpetuates so many places. And like, you know, but you get this crushing sense of history in moments like this, that we are witnessing something that has unfolded many times before, but we're witnessing it with this extremely new development, which is cell phones and social media and the ability to publish and consume and share and comment on it. So finally the news, right? Like think of the term itself, like what's new in the world, right? Like finally the news has caught up to our abilities, like the speed at which history unfolds. We finally have a tool to map these kind of compressions and extensions, right, of time. Like I don't know how an accordion works. I don't know what it's called when you open it up. I don't know. We need an accordion player. But in the sense that like now we can track it, and partly one of the reasons why there is, so I think, aside from wholesale silence and like they're just a corrupt class of scum, I honestly think this war is too much for our media class. They're dumb. Like they're a dumb bunch of normies who have the attention span of, you know, like, you know, juvenile goats who are even more provincial than juvenile goats, by the way, who like have no experience in the world other than their own small universities and their cliques and traveling around to like whatever European capital. So like this band of normies who like rules over the so-called like broadcast air, like the fact that they're silent on Gaza. I mean, yeah, it is an official policy. It is part of the settler colonial game, that like the alliance that all the settler colonial countries of the West have with the Zionist entity, is that they will just kind of turn a blind eye and be like, okay, even though it's against our economic interest to not show this stuff, like the media companies are saying this, like we're going to go ahead and like not show it. I mean, imagine if they showed a fraction of what's happening in Gaza. People would be glued to the screens, because violence does solicit more attention, like it does. So this is actually going against their economic interest to not show it. But that's because it's not in their strategic interest to show it, because ultimately the consent of hundreds of millions of people in the West, which they have, I mean, protest notwithstanding, public opinion notwithstanding, the consent is insofar as we have, like across the West, you have mass political apathy, right? That's been inculcated into them intentionally by decades and decades of various forces, but one of them principally being neoliberal austerity and grinding people into dust like every day and like as like wage labor, so that by the time they come home, they don't even have the ability to like consume a fraction of what we do. This is our jobs, mind you. Like we're part of a new class of people who like pay attention to this stuff, and you know, all of us are more or less involved in like, you know, a certain sort of sector of the media class, whatever you want to call it, like whatever niche we occupy, like academia, literature, whatever. Like, but ultimately, like the masses of people are grind to dust every day at their job. More so with every coming year, they like have to pay more for groceries. They pay more for rent. Like it's a brutal world out there for most working people, right? And so, like, I don't begrudge the masses of apathetic Canadians, Americans, whatever, right? Like I don't say like it's you know, they're subjects of history all the same, right? Like a guy comes home after 10 hours of working, he's gonna put on Al Jazeera English, and like he's gonna do that. Like that's not gonna happen. So partly, now were they to put it on the mainstream news channels, a fraction of it, maybe we'd see something different. I would go so far as to say that, like, if, and that's partly why, I mean, I've dithered on this question over the years in the past of what does it mean to like have media on your side. And I've thought forever that actually it doesn't mean very much, because ultimately people are apathetic and the media, they don't take seriously much anyways. I'm thinking, and I'm still not sure about where I fall, but I'm beginning to think that the wholesales, if it didn't matter, they would represent it more. They would cover it more. So it does matter. To what degree and to what extent, I don't know. That's something we can debate. But one thing that has bugged me is like our class of people, right? Academics, writers, whatever you want to call it, culture makers, content people, as I like to say, it's all content. We're all making hot dogs. I regret to inform you. Some are written and published in journals. Others are put on podcasts, but it's ultimately the same nature of the work itself, which is making content. But like, I feel that the majority of them have washed their hands of this, because ultimately, I mean, it's a mix of, I think Zionists are good at putting pressure on people and making examples of people and telling people like, oh, if you're going to speak out, we're going to make life uncomfortable for you. But it's also a general, this apathetic sense of there's only so much I can do. I can just whatever, you know. So this is something that I thought about like a lot, like this. But you know, there's also a historical something that's like never experienced before by people here, and this also, I think, results in apathy just because of the scale of the historical movement, which is, this is a 500-year world system we're seeing winding down. Like, America inherited European power, right? The European power that was cultivated. And if you want to be like Giovanni Arrighi or whatever and like trace capitalism, it's like the Italian civil states. Thank you very much, Italy. Is it Italy first and then Spain? Is that the Arrighi? Yeah, it like kind of moves, right? And then it sort of ends up in
the Sea
England.
Republic, yeah.
Yeah, like it's just like that's in that kind of path, and Washington and New York are the final resting place. I mean, I honestly think, like, if you read Hegel, the book on history, the lectures on history, he says that, oh, America is the Geist. Like, this is like this guy, like, I mean, he was like there during Napoleonic times, so like he also thought a lot about Napoleon too. But there is a sense that I think there is a truth to the fact that America is the culmination of a world system. But that world system is now in open decline. It's spiraling out of power, that it expired, that its expiry date is long past in terms of its ability. And it's also maxed out its ability to flex on its enemies, which I say a lot. I repeat a lot on the show, I know. But I don't think the extent to which we can, and this is what I meant about the elasticity of time and like the importance in a moment like that, is that we have to link together, like we in watching a clip like the one I saw yesterday, which like it was like it's not that I couldn't sleep, I had to go to bed earlier than usual because I was so depressed by what I saw. So I like last night I literally fell asleep at 8 like a toddler. It was when they bombed Shifa and the guy came out and he had recently had surgery and he had like a screw in his wrist, and he's like gingerly walking out, and you're thinking like, this man has just had surgery and he's like been bombed. You know, like this scene has so much meaning, has like so much like intense meaning, and I'm consuming it like from the comforts of my bed, like in my warm house, like with my dog beside me, like my stomach full, my health perfect, you know, like I have immense amount of space. Like if I wanted to go in the next room, I could do that. Same thing. Like I have so much, I could go in the basement and doing the same thing. Like the autonomy I have over my life and over the world, so to speak, is so great compared to what that poor man is going through, that nameless man who may not even be alive anymore. Like that life, but like the intimacy of that, you know, we've never gotten that. We've never gotten that kind of, that ability to see other human life in its most victimized and subjugated and terrorized form. I mean, I guess that's not true. You can bear witness to these things. There are recordings in some way or another of other colonial wars, sure. And watching them and like consuming those is partly, you know, a necessary thing for anybody who has a kind of radical approach to the world, is that you have to watch these things. You have to see the videos from Yemen in the 60s of like a British soldier like kicking a Yemeni guy, like the elderly man. You have to take that in because it does radicalize you. But let's be real, guys. Like this world order will not go without a cataclysmic global war. Like, do you think the Americans will just give up? Will they just give up? Like, of course they're going to do the same thing to Taiwan, like that they're doing to Ukraine. They will sacrifice the planet to spoil it for anyone who comes after them. Like, Americans are leading this genocide. Don't put it on Israel. Israel is just an extension of America. It's a unique form of proxy, sure. It's something that historically is unprecedented, I would say, as a project of colonial domination. Like, America is such a nasty force in the world, a brutal force in history, that it has entire countries that wage its genocidal war on its behalf. Like, it can subcontract its political desires to entire countries, right, and have them destroyed in the meantime, right? Like, sometimes it doesn't work out for them in the case of Ukraine, but of course it always works out because this is just to keep the US economy going. Anyways, this is just me ranting at this point, but we have to think about our ability, like what the consequences are to us of watching this stuff. Sure, like that's important, because like it's beginning, I've seen it in these, because I edit some of these, some less than others, but like I'm beginning to see it in our group episodes, that like our ability to filter out, because you have to do a dual game. You have to, on the one hand, see those local scenes. You have to see those everyday scenes, those like terrorizing images of kids suffering, of kids' faces burned, of the dude with the broken leg, they ran over him with the tank. And that was just the one. There's many examples, iterations of that, by the way, too, right? Like there's so many to name. You have to like enumerate the flower massacres, right? Because there's so many. So like you have to use, somehow you have to come up with a method in your brain to hold the local scenes and then the global history behind it that's unfolding, right? So that you can't unsee Algeria in this. You can't unsee 1857, right? Like you can't unsee the revolts, the previous revolts that colonized people went through, and ultimately, and like a lot of them failed, right? Like there's no formula that you can say that like colonization, like settler colonialism always loses these battles. I mean, it loses the war, sure, but the battles themselves, it doesn't lose. Many times it doesn't, right? That's the case in Vietnam, especially. I don't know. It's troubling, man. I guess, I mean, I don't know, Justin, this is kind of your job, but I'm kicking it out to you guys. Like, how do you guys, especially the journalists on this call, because journalism is this weird, right? It's this attempt to localize, like represent the local in a way, I guess, if that's like a fair way. I don't know, Nora, what do you say? Like, how do you hold it in your brain, especially with EI? Because those live streams, like those live streams are like, you have people from Gaza, you have people report, like, it's a very intimate form of work, I would say, in terms of representing what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, are you asking about how I, as a journalist, like categorize, like
how do you hold those? How do you
Yeah.
like, because you collect, in a way, you're collecting all those local atrocities, right? The singular atrocities, like this flower massacre or whatever, right? Like stuff we talked about. But then you also have to string them together into a narrative, right? Like I find, like, I don't know how journalists do that. Like it's like, I have utmost respect for people who can do it well.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's all about context. It's about telling a story in a way that has a through line. It's about I think mainstream media, corporate media is all about like retaining the audience's attention. And so a lot of it is I mean, I can't even watch like corporate media anymore. Like the news stories are like 12 seconds. You have a 12
They're
second
all just
hit, and you're
podcasts now. It's
It's,
all
I
just
mean,
a
it's,
podcast. Like,
yeah, it's
like
crazy.
CNN is just the world's most expensive podcast.
Yeah.
I stopped watching mainstream media
Yeah.
many years ago. I can't even stand most alternative media anymore.
Yeah.
Like
It's
if
true.
you said, you know, if you say the horrific, if I hear like the horrific attack of October 7th, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'll change
No,
the
I know.
channel.
Turn it off.
That's all I need. I'm done.
Yeah.
Um,
No, but I think it is about learning how to weave a story, and figuring out how to fit like the personal into the kind of collective narrative. So yeah, so like we have, you know, Abu Bakr from, from reporting from Gaza when he's got like, a scant cell signal. And mainly it's just about like providing space for him to tell his story, or it's about, Ben Thompson who just came back from Gaza, this physician who lives in Toronto, and just giving him the space to talk about what he saw, and then, taking threads of these testimonies, these very precious testimonies. Like people trust us, I think, with their stories, with their experiences. I think that's a really like sacred contract that you have if you're a good journalist. Like it's a huge responsibility. And it doesn't take a lot of effort. You just you tee up the ball, whatever, and you let them swing, to use a baseball analogy. Like you provide a space for people to talk about what they've seen, and then you kind of like contextualize into the larger aspect. So when Ben Thompson is talking about the horrors that he saw in the emergency rooms that he was working in Gaza, you use that to talk about the 17 years of siege and how the Gaza healthcare system was already like in this state of normalized debilitation, and how then it becomes even more clear how heroic these physicians and paramedics and doctors and nurses are operating in Gaza. How they're world-class healthcare workers, and they have been working in draconian situations for nearly 2 decades, and then this genocide comes, and they're the ones being executed and detained and stripped naked and blindfolded and interrogated and tortured and executed, and every day there are testimonies of these heroic doctors who don't leave their patients when the Israeli stormtroopers are swarming Shifa hospital, and they're executed. So I don't know. I mean, it's all about kind of honoring that sacred contract. And I think ultimately, like my ethos, and I'm sure it's the same ethos of my colleagues, is like we're accountable to the people that we report on. We're accountable to their struggle of liberation, and we have to get it right. And yeah, that's so I don't know. Does that answer? I have no idea. I'm still figuring it out. I've been a journalist
No.
for 20 years, and I
No,
still don't think I
you
know what
figured
I'm
it out.
doing.
You've figured it out. You have absolutely figured it out. It's everybody else that hasn't figured it out. But I have one last question to throw out for anybody, which is like we've been going back and forth for all these months between the unprecedented nature of everything that Israel's been doing and the the desire to historically contextualize it and say like these kinds of things have happened before. But at some point I've started to feel like saying these kinds of things have happened before is a disservice to the shocking nature of what Israel's doing. So that's a balance. I don't know how people strike that balance, because it's like I like Sina, when you said it's an old-fashioned colonial genocide, I'm like, well, when I think about like, you know, there's tons of parallels, you know, what Germany did in Africa, or what Germany did in Eastern Europe, or what the Americans did across the west of the continent. But there's not that many. Like and it's got to be among the worst, and it's got to be among the most, like, the pleasure taken, the desire not to hide it, the I don't know. I want to kind of honor the fact that it's so unbelievably horrific, and I'm a little bit afraid of like saying, oh, it's all been done before, you know.
I wonder about that too. Like I think about I try to think about what it means to say that. I think my intention beyond that is not so much the praxis of Israeli power, it's more the intention of Israeli power, and that what it shares with other settler colonial projects in moments of crisis is that it reaches to this, like their like shared ursprung, right, which is genocide, right, which is like that's a technology. Genocide is a technology of war. It's a technology of politics, let's say, almost, that's older than Zionism, that will also like supersede Zionism and survive Zionism too, unfortunately. But what I think what's unprecedented is that the scale of the Zionist violence to basically what is like one small city, right? Like stretched across this strip. Yeah, concentration, and like the intensely localized version of a genocidal war is that like unleashing the equivalent of like the tonnage, the sort of the explosive tonnage of 4 nuclear bombs onto this like this chunk of a place that's a half the size of New York City. Like that's what's happening. 35% of the buildings of Gaza are destroyed. Like that takes work. That takes an effort that is unique. I just feel that like the actual individual scenes, what I'm talking about is the individual scenes of the cruelty, like the cruelty, the torture, the death, the murder, the scale, is that's an older technology. The siege, these are tools that genocidal projects have used before. It's just the intimacy of our ability to see this live is new, I would say. Because, you know, I mean, the US killed 1 million in Iraq, guys. Like, they didn't, like, they used the simple, like, they, you know, they raped, they killed doctors. Like, I'm sure, like, this is not, it's just that we didn't have, you know, we didn't have this. That doesn't minimize what's happening in Gaza by any stretch. I don't want to say that that's what I'm intending to say. It's more that we have this problem that I have of moving back and forth between the precedented and the unprecedented nature of this. The same thing you described. I mean, maybe it's just the easy answer is it's dialectical, and it's it's both together.
It's just it's one of the few struggles that I'm not able to just kind of settle and say like it's one or the other. Mikey, you unmuted yourself, so
I think to kind of build off of what both of you are saying, I think it's the immediacy with which we're hearing about and seeing the atrocities that's unique and remarkable for this particular epoch, right? Because all of these types of atrocities, we definitely have seen iterations of it in the recent past. But like, I mean, like, one example is that one American soldier who, you know, raped that Iraqi child, right, and then killed them and their entire family. But I think, you know, but we didn't hear about it the day after it happened, right? And I think that's a distinct difference where we are bearing witness oftentimes in real time or almost real time to some of the most terrible, horrific, unspeakable atrocities that humanity is capable of. And, you know, just I mean, that one example that Nora gave of, the past week at al-Shifa, one of the women who was able to escape, 5 months pregnant, told the IOF soldiers who were beating her to stop beating her because she was pregnant, who then proceeded to rape her in front of her husband, her children, and the rest of her family, and saying that if any of them closed their eyes, that they would be killed. Like, that's something you normally in, pre like the live streaming of genocide period, you would hear about in war crimes tribunals. But we're hearing it now as the raid on al-Shifa and al-Nasser and other neighboring hospitals are still being raided, and these types of rapes and field executions, the likes of which I think can only be compared to like the Einsatzgruppe and Holocaust of bullets, is still happening at concurrently, right? So, and I think this is possibly part of why just bearing witness to it from afar is so kind of like disorienting, is because there's I mean, we have all the luxuries that Sina mentioned earlier about, just being able to go into another room freely without worrying about, oh, this room has too many windows, right? Worrying about being sniped at, or just opening the fridge and letting all of that, a cold air just leak out, or turning on the faucet and just kind of like spacing out as we do the dishes. We get that luxury, but still having to navigate like how there's no time to even really process the grief, because there's always just this kind of like cascade of atrocities that just continue to pour out of our phone. It's kind of like really, it's an awful thing to have to experience, but at the same time, I guess on the plus side, going back to kind of these competing narratives, I think the silver lining to that is that it shows what none of these mainstream media outlets are willing and able to show in real time, right? Where again, like it's kind of like being able to have whistleblowers to My Lai massacre like the days after it happens, as opposed to it being years of a contested narrative, right? And I think that is why, because the U.S., in addition to its actual, physical power and physical threats and actual implementation of force are definitely key. But secondary to that is this war for the narrative. And I've been saying for a while, like, basically, the only thing that the U.S. still, leads the world in, besides, building weapons of war, is putting out a good narrative, right? But even that, we're starting to kind of starting to spin
and
out
medical
because,
GoFundMe's.
yeah. It's just we're seeing like I think, yeah, going to the Crocus City Hall massacre, right? Over 115 people killed at this point, and like, just like any other kind of like ISIS atrocity, it's got U.S. fingerprints all fucking over it, right? And it's kind of like it's got echoes of kind of like the Wahhabi kind of like extremism in Xinjiang that we were seeing earlier, and just trying to create this boogeyman of radical Islam, right? That's just not working anymore, because in real time we're seeing that narrative kind of collapse in on itself, where a young boy whose name literally is Islam, like helped shepherd like over 100 people out of that. And so I think a lot of the seeds that the U.S. and Israel tried to plant to try to retake the narrative just keep falling apart because of kind of citizen journalism just being able to dismantle all of it so quickly.
Okay. Yeah, no. Thanks, Mikey. I think Sina wants us to look at something as we
Okay. This is
by way of conclusion.
I want to end on a funnier, more amusing note. It's also enraging, but there was an article published in Brain Damage Magazine. No, I think it's called Damage Magazine. And I want all of us to look at it. I want the listeners of this show to give their thoughts to the author, because we live in the public sphere and authors, and he wrote this for the public sphere, and this is something that this is we're doing critique. We're gonna do a good old fashioned close reading.
7 realities of Israel Palestine.
This is a political science professor at Brown University, named after the color of poo.
Have a good day, everyone.
Just comforting.
Wow.
Comforting and do not fit into a neat hole, nor do they fit easily into inherited slogans or moral formulas.
People aren't watching. You have to remember the poor audio listeners, Justin. 7 realities of Israel Palestine. Can you scroll back up, sir?
You lost me at
Sina.
7 realities.
He was reading it, and you were talking over.
Oh,
him.
sorry.
This
He was mumbling.
This is the opposite. Isn't this the opposite of therapeutic?
It's therapeutic to yell.
You're re-traumatizing
This
us.
is the 2 minutes of hate.
You're re-traumatizing us.
We need to hate on Western leftists because this is a class of people who are employed and they teach children in universities, and they hold cultural power. So it's important to hold them to account and to highlight the stupid ththings they say. Because it's a horrible article, and I just want you to scroll down. I just want you to because it exemplifies the apathy.
There's no political side worth choosing.
Yes,
they're both bad.
This is liberal bullshit. Come on, this is liberal bullshit.
Who asked you, Gurevich, to choose? Who cares what you choose?
Who cares what you fucking say?
Who asked you? Nobody cares what
Good
you choose.
Lord.
Reality 1. He put 7 realities.
No, we're not going through every 7.
No, we're not going through these realities. I'm not interested in this reality.
He got you guys so mad.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah, that's right.
Matteo.
I'm stopping the chair. I'm stopping the chair.
Matteo was gonna wage jihad. Come on.
I'm sorry, Sina. I'm sorry. We can't do it.
We want to do critique jihad. No, you have to read it, guys. It's so stupid. This is what podcasts are for. It's for group bullying.
Hold on a second.
I sent it when it came out, and Justin got very angry.
We have to read it.
That's my job.
I don't even remember, Alex. I'm in such a soup of anger and rage that I didn't even remember that you do that
Share
or
the
my
article
reaction.
again. Come on, Dad. Share the article. Oh, he's leaving.
No.
Oh, we can switch.
Justin's
to a real
gone.
platform.
Look what you've done.
Look what
Sina.
I did.
Sina.
Look what I no. Come back. Just this is like that time I had to pee at the cottage and I didn't go pee. Remember? Who remembers
I'm gonna
that?
I'm gonna stop recording now.
No, don't stop.
We're all
recording.
happy.
We want to make fun. We want to make fun of Alex Gurevich.
You've lifted our moods, and we're dishonoring our own therapy feelings to end on this note. So we'll see you next time.
I feel oppressed.
Yeah. At least that's a feeling. Okay, bye everyone.
Realities of oppression, Sina.
We need regime change.
7 realities of oppression.
7 realities of oppression. Save it for next time. Bye everybody.